The money was never stolen. The quiet waitress whispered softly, and the billionaire beside the champagne tower nearly dropped his glass. The music kept playing for another 2 seconds before the room noticed something was wrong. Then silence spread slowly across the ballroom like a cold wave rolling over dark water. Damian Whitmore stood frozen beneath the golden chandeliers of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the young waitress beside him. Around them, Manhattan's elite continued laughing over crystal glasses and million-dollar conversations, unaware that $80 million had just disappeared from the Whitmore Family Trust less than 3 hours earlier. The annual Whitmore Foundation Gala had been transformed into a private emergency meeting disguised as elegance. Politicians, investors, attorneys, everyone important enough to protect the family name had remained behind after the charity dinner ended. Rain hammered softly against the 30-foot windows overlooking Fifth Avenue, while security teams moved quietly through the marble corridors upstairs. Damian loosened the collar of his dark navy tuxedo for the first time all night. At 38, he had built a reputation as the coldest financial mind on Wall Street. Newspapers called him untouchable. Television anchors called him brilliant. Employees called him terrifying when he wasn't in the room. But at this exact moment, under the soft gold lights of the ballroom, he looked like a man standing on cracking ice. "Excuse me," he asked quietly. The waitress lowered her eyes and adjusted the silver coffee tray in her hands. "Nothing, sir." Her voice remained calm. Too calm. Damian studied her carefully now. She looked younger than he first assumed. Mid-20s maybe. Blonde hair pinned neatly beneath the restaurant's uniform cap. Pale skin. Soft features. The kind of face most wealthy men forgot seconds after looking away. But her eyes were different. Clear blue. Observant. Like someone who noticed everything and said almost nothing. A dangerous kind of intelligence. Damian stepped closer. "You said the money was never stolen." She hesitated. "Just briefly. I shouldn't have said anything." Across the room, attorneys argued quietly around a glowing financial screen displaying account transfers from the Whitmore family vault. Numbers flickered red across the glass monitor. $80 million gone. No external breach. No cyber attack. No forced access. It made no sense. One of the investigators suddenly raised his voice near the screen. The Zurich account was closed at 8:42 p.m. The tray in the waitress's hands trembled almost invisibly. Damian noticed. "How do you know about Zurich?" he asked immediately. Her fingers tightened around the coffee pot. She did not answer. The orchestra downstairs had already stopped playing. Somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, thunder rolled across Manhattan. Damian felt something unfamiliar crawling beneath his calm exterior. Not panic. Recognition. As if this strange woman standing beside him had just opened a door he didn't know existed. "Look at me," he said softly. Slowly she did. And for the first time that night, Damian Whitmore realized the quiet waitress was not afraid of him at all. The rain outside grew heavier by the minute, turning the windows of the Whitmore Grand into dark mirrors streaked with silver water. Evelyn Carter stood silently beside the dessert station while servers rushed through the ballroom carrying untouched coffee cups and half-finished champagne glasses. Nobody cared about dessert anymore. The entire gala had shifted into something colder, quieter. Dangerous whispers traveled beneath the soft piano music still drifting weakly from the lower floor. $80 million did not simply disappear from one of the most protected family trusts in New York, especially not from the Whitmores. Evelyn kept her eyes lowered as two attorneys hurried past her toward the private conference room upstairs. One of them looked pale enough to collapse. The older one was sweating through his collar despite the freezing air conditioning. She noticed everything. The trembling hands. The forced calm. The fear people tried to hide when money vanished. Damian Whitmore remained near the center of the ballroom, speaking quietly with his head of security. His posture stayed controlled, but his jaw had tightened so sharply that the muscles beneath his cheek flickered each time someone mentioned the missing funds. Every few seconds his gaze drifted back toward Evelyn. Not with attraction, not curiosity alone. Recognition. Like his instincts were warning him that she did not belong among the serving staff carrying silver trays and folded napkins. Evelyn moved toward the side station and carefully poured fresh coffee into porcelain cups. Her movements were smooth, precise, calm enough to disappear into the background. She had learned long ago that invisible people heard the truth first. Mississippi, the voice behind her was low and controlled. Damien. She turned slowly. Up close, he looked even more exhausted than before. Fine lines had formed around his eyes beneath the ballroom lights, and a faint shadow darkened his jaw despite the perfect tailoring of his tuxedo. "You know something?" he said quietly. Evelyn handed a cup to a nearby guest without looking away from him. "I know rich families panic differently than poor ones." His expression hardened slightly. "That is not an answer." "No," she replied softly. "It is not." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain tapped gently against the windows 30 floors above Manhattan, while distant thunder rolled somewhere over the Hudson River. Damien watched her carefully. Most people became nervous under his attention. Executives stumbled through presentations. Investors lost confidence halfway through negotiations. But this woman simply stood there holding a coffee pot like she had all the time in the world. It unsettled him more than anger would have. "How did you know about Zurich?" he finally asked. Evelyn glanced briefly toward the glowing financial monitor across the ballroom. "Because people do not close emergency accounts before money disappears unless they already know where the money is going." Damien's eyes narrowed immediately. "Who told you that?" "Nobody." "Then how would you know?" Her fingers brushed lightly against the silver watch hidden beneath her uniform sleeve. "Old. Scratched. Meaningful." "Because," she said quietly, "this is not the first time I have seen a family destroy itself over hidden money." Before Damien could answer, one of the investigators suddenly called his name from across the room. "Mr. Whitmore, we found another transfer." The room instantly fell silent again. Damien looked toward the screen, then back at Evelyn. She already knew. He could see it in her face. Not surprise, not confusion, just the heavy expression of someone watching history repeat itself. And for the first time in years, Damien Whitmore felt something colder than fear settling slowly into his chest. He felt unprepared. The glowing financial screen reflected across Damien Whitmore's face as another transaction appeared in red letters. The ballroom felt colder now. Conversations had stopped completely. Even the staff moved more quietly, as if the building itself understood something dangerous was unfolding beneath the chandeliers and polished marble floors. That transfer was authorized manually, one investigator said carefully, adjusting his glasses while studying the data. Not remotely. Someone inside the family office approved it. A heavy silence followed. Damien stared at the screen without blinking. Manual authorization meant betrayal. Not hacking. Not fraud from the outside world. Someone close enough to carry the Whitmore name had opened the vault from within. Evelyn stood near the back service station, pouring untouched coffee into fresh cups that nobody planned to drink. Her expression remained composed, but inside, old memories were beginning to rise like shadows beneath dark water. She recognized the pattern already. Wealthy families always believed money vanished because of enemies. They almost never suspected the people sitting at their own tables. One of the older board members suddenly slammed a folder onto the table. "This is impossible," he snapped. The Zurich Reserve account was confidential. Only 6 people even knew it existed. Evelyn lowered her eyes immediately. 6 people. That part matched perfectly. Damien noticed the tiny change in her expression. Tiny. Almost invisible. But he had built an empire by noticing details other men ignored. "Everyone out," he said suddenly. The room froze. Several attorneys exchanged uncertain looks. "Mr. Whitmore?" "Now." His voice stayed calm, which somehow made it more powerful. Chairs scraped softly across marble floors as executives, investigators, and assistants quietly gathered their documents and exited the ballroom one by one. Nobody argued with Damien Whitmore when he used that tone. Within 2 minutes, the enormous room had emptied into silence except for the rain tapping against the windows and the distant hum of traffic 30 stories below. Evelyn slowly placed the coffee pot onto a silver tray. "I should get back to work." "No," Damien stepped closer. "You are not a waitress." Her eyes lifted toward him carefully. "That is literally my job." "No," he repeated quietly. "It is your cover." For the first time all evening, something flickered across Evelyn's face. Not fear. Fatigue. The kind carried by people who had spent years running from old ghosts. Damien noticed the silver watch beneath her sleeve again. Worn edges. Scratched glass. Expensive once, but old enough to belong to another life. Who are you? He asked softly. Evelyn looked toward the storm outside before answering. Someone who learned a long time ago that powerful families bury truth faster than they bury money. Damien's jaw tightened slightly. You keep speaking like you know this family. I know enough. That is not an answer either. She smiled faintly then. Sad. Almost tired. You are very used to controlling conversations, Mr. Whitmore. And you are very skilled at avoiding them. Another flash of lightning illuminated the ballroom windows behind her, casting pale reflections across the polished floor. For a brief second, Damien saw her differently. Not as a server, not as background noise, but as someone standing outside the walls of his world while somehow understanding it better than anyone inside. Evelyn reached for the tray again. The money moved before tonight, she said quietly. At least 48 hours earlier. Damien stared at her sharply. That information has not been released. I know. Then how do you know? Her fingers brushed the silver watch once more. A habit. A memory. A wound. Because the person who moved it was not trying to hide the money, she whispered softly. They were trying to hide who would be blamed for it. The thunder outside rolled louder this time, deep enough to shake the ballroom windows. And somewhere beneath the weight of old money, old secrets, and old lies, Damien Whitmore finally realized this woman did not simply know about the missing fortune. She knew the family. Damien Whitmore did not sleep that night. By 2:15 in the morning, the gala had officially ended, but the top floor of the Whitmore Grand remained alive with quiet panic. Security teams moved through the private offices upstairs while attorneys whispered over stacks of printed transactions spread across a 40-foot conference table. The city below glowed silver through the rain-covered windows, restless and cold. Damien stood alone near the far end of the room, staring at the transfer logs displayed across 3 monitors. Every trail led nowhere. Every authorization circled back into the family itself. And somehow, the quiet waitress downstairs already seemed to understand the pattern before his investigators did. That bothered him more than the missing money. Sir, his head of security approached carefully. We ran the employee file. Damien looked up immediately. And Evelyn Carter, 27 years old, employed here 11 months. No criminal record. No social media activity. No family listed. Damien frowned slightly. That is impossible. There is more. The security chief slid a thin folder across the table. Before working here, she disappears completely for almost 4 years. Damien opened the file slowly. Tax gaps. No listed employment. No address history beyond temporary rentals. The kind of silence people built intentionally. Find out what she is hiding, Damien said quietly. Already trying. The older man hesitated before continuing. But there is one strange thing. Damien lifted his eyes. Her fingerprints flagged an archived financial database from 11 years ago. The room suddenly felt still again. What database? Forensic accounting certification records. Damien's expression hardened instantly. She worked in finance? Apparently. The rain outside softened into a slow rhythm against the glass, while Damien stared down at the file in silence. Forensic accounting. Suddenly her words downstairs sounded different in his head. The precision. The confidence. The way she analyzed the Zurich account within seconds. She had not guessed. She had recognized something. What else? He asked quietly. Most records were sealed. Sealed by who? Federal request. Damien slowly closed the folder. His instincts rarely failed him. And right now, every instinct he had was telling him the same thing. Evelyn Carter had not entered his life accidentally. Downstairs, the ballroom lights had dimmed to half brightness while the overnight cleaning staff quietly reset tables for breakfast service. Evelyn moved alone between empty chairs, gathering abandoned wine glasses into silver trays. The silence felt familiar, comfortable. Wealthy people always left chaos behind them after midnight. She paused briefly near the enormous ballroom windows overlooking Manhattan. Rainwater slid across the glass in soft lines while yellow taxi lights blurred far below. For a moment, her reflection stared back at her. Pale face, tired eyes, blonde hair pinned neatly beneath the hotel uniform. Invisible, just the way she needed to be. You should have left hours ago. Damien's voice appeared behind her quietly. Evelyn did not turn immediately. So should you. He stepped closer, removing the suit jacket now hanging loosely over one shoulder. Without the crowd around him, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man carrying something heavy for too long. My security team found your records, he said carefully. Evelyn finally faced him. Calm as ever. Then your security team works faster than your investigators. You were a forensic accountant. A long time ago. For who? Her eyes lowered slightly. People with expensive lawyers. Damien studied her face carefully. Why disappear? The question lingered between them while thunder rolled softly over the sleeping city outside. Evelyn's fingers touched the silver watch beneath her sleeve again. This time Damien noticed the tiny engraving along the edge. A date. 11 years old. Her voice remained soft when she finally answered. Because sometimes the truth costs more than people can afford to lose. Damien held her gaze without speaking, and for reasons he could not fully explain yet, he suddenly realized something unsettling. Evelyn Carter was not hiding from the missing fortune. She was hiding from whoever moved it. By 4:30 in the morning, the storm over Manhattan had finally begun to weaken, but the tension inside the Whitmore Grand only grew heavier. Most of the executives had gone home under strict confidentiality agreements, yet lights still burned across the upper floors where Damien's private investigators continued searching through transaction records dating back nearly 15 years. Every hour uncovered another inconsistency, another missing signature, another account that should not have existed. Damien stood inside his office overlooking Park Avenue with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. Cold coffee sat untouched beside stacks of financial reports spread across the glass desk. He had spent his entire adult life believing control solved everything. But tonight control felt like smoke slipping through his hands. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Come in. His assistant stepped carefully into the office carrying a thin black folder. Sir, we found something connected to Evelyn Carter. Damien lifted his eyes immediately. What kind of something? An archived federal inquiry from 11 years ago. She placed the folder down gently. Most of it is sealed, but one name appears repeatedly beside hers. Damien opened the file slowly. The moment he saw the name, his expression changed. Richard Carter. His chest tightened unexpectedly. He knew that name. Everyone in high finance knew it once. Richard Carter had been one of the most respected forensic accountants in New York before his career collapsed overnight during a corporate embezzlement scandal connected to Whitmore Capital more than a decade earlier. Damien remembered the headlines. Fraud investigation. Missing pension funds. Insider theft. Richard Carter blamed publicly. Career destroyed within 48 hours. Damien's father had personally signed the statement distancing the company from him. That cannot be possible, Damien murmured quietly. His assistant hesitated. There is more. She opened another page inside the folder. A photograph paperclip to the report showed a younger Richard Carter standing outside a courthouse beside a teenage girl with pale blonde hair and sharp blue eyes. Evelyn. Damien stared at the picture in silence. Even younger, she carried the same expression she wore now. Calm. Observant. Like someone already learning how dangerous truth could become. She is his daughter, the assistant whispered softly. Damien leaned back slowly in his chair while the city lights flickered across the office windows behind him. Suddenly, everything felt different. Her knowledge. Her silence. The way she reacted when Zurich was mentioned. None of it was coincidence. Did my father know? He asked quietly. We cannot confirm yet. Damien closed the file carefully. His jaw tightened again. 11 years ago, he had still been studying economics at Yale, while his father controlled Whitmore Capital with absolute authority. He remembered hearing fragments about the Carter case, but wealthy families had a way of making scandals disappear before younger generations asked too many questions. Downstairs, the breakfast shift had already begun preparing the ballroom for morning meetings. Evelyn stood alone near the industrial kitchen sink rinsing crystal glasses beneath warm water while soft jazz played faintly through the speakers overhead. The exhaustion in her eyes looked older than 27. She heard footsteps approaching before she looked up. Damien stopped several feet away from her. Neither spoke at first. The kitchen lights hummed softly above them, while steam rose slowly from the sink between them. Finally, Damien placed the black folder onto the stainless steel counter. Evelyn's hands froze the instant she saw the photograph partially exposed beneath the papers. Richard Carter smiling beside her outside the courthouse 11 years ago. Her father alive. Her expression did not collapse. It became quieter somehow. More tired. Damien watched her carefully. "You knew this family before I ever met you," he said softly. Evelyn stared down at the photograph for several seconds before answering. "Yes. And you still came here to work?" Her fingers trembled slightly against the edge of the counter before becoming still again. "Sometimes," she whispered. "The only way to learn the truth is to stay close to the people hiding it." The industrial kitchen fell silent except for the sound of water dripping slowly from the silver faucet into the sink below. Evelyn kept her eyes on the old photograph resting beside Damien's hand. Her father looked younger there than she remembered him. Proud, hopeful, untouched by what came later. Damien studied her carefully while the early morning staff moved quietly somewhere beyond the swinging kitchen doors. "My father blamed him publicly," he said at last. Evelyn nodded once. "Yes. Did Richard Carter steal the money?" The question lingered heavily between them. Evelyn finally turned off the water and dried her hands slowly with a white towel before answering. "No." Her voice remained calm, but Damien noticed how tightly she folded the towel afterward. Precise movements, controlled emotions. The kind people learned after surviving humiliation too large to explain. "Then why did nobody defend him?" Damien asked quietly. Evelyn let out a faint breath that almost sounded like a laugh without humor. "Because powerful companies do not defend people who become convenient." Outside the kitchen windows, dawn had begun creeping slowly across Manhattan. Pale gray light spilled between the buildings while rainwater still clung to the streets below. The city looked exhausted. So did she. Damien leaned slightly against the stainless steel counter. "You think my family framed your father?" "I know they did." The certainty in her voice unsettled him immediately. No hesitation. No bitterness either. Just truth spoken quietly enough to feel heavier. "And you stayed silent for 11 years. Evelyn looked down at the silver watch beneath her sleeve. "Silence survives longer than anger." Damien frowned slightly. "That sounds practiced." "It is." She finally looked up at him again. "When my father lost his license, nobody hired him. When newspapers printed his face, nobody asked questions afterward. People only remember accusations, Mr. Whitmore. They rarely remember corrections." Damien lowered his eyes briefly toward the photograph again. Richard Carter smiling beside his daughter outside the courthouse steps. He looked nothing like the criminal the media had described years ago. He looked ordinary, honest, human. "What happened to him?" Damien asked softly. Evelyn became still, completely still. Even the exhaustion in her face seemed to disappear behind something colder. "He died 3 years later." Damien's chest tightened unexpectedly. "I am sorry." She nodded politely, but the sadness in her eyes carried something deeper than grief now. "He spent the last year of his life trying to prove the numbers had been altered." Her fingers brushed the edge of the counter lightly. Nobody listened. The kitchen lights hummed softly overhead, while somewhere in the hotel lobby a piano player began rehearsing slow morning jazz for breakfast guests. Damien suddenly realized he could no longer separate the missing fortune from the Carter scandal 11 years earlier. The patterns were too similar. Missing funds, internal transfers, convenient blame. "You think this is happening again," he said quietly. Evelyn met his eyes directly. "I think someone inside your family learned they could hide behind the same lie twice." Damien stared at her in silence. Every instinct told him to protect the Whitmore name. That instinct had been built into him since childhood. Family first. Reputation first. Control everything before the world sees weakness. But another part of him kept remembering the investigators upstairs. The missing transfers. The sealed records. The fear in the room whenever old accounts appeared on screen. "Why come back now?" he finally asked. Evelyn looked toward the rising morning light beyond the kitchen windows. "Because someone reopened the Zurich account last month." Damien's expression hardened immediately. That account was supposed to be permanently sealed after the Carter investigation. Exactly. A quiet silence settled between them again. Then Evelyn reached into her apron pocket and slowly removed a folded piece of paper worn soft at the edges from age. She placed it carefully onto the counter between them. Damien unfolded it slowly. The color drained from his face almost instantly. It was a photocopy of a transfer authorization signed 11 years ago, and beneath the Whitmore capital seal sat his father's signature. Damien Whitmore stared at his father's signature for so long that the edges of the paper began to blur beneath the kitchen lights. The document looked authentic. Not copied carelessly. Not forged by an amateur. Every detail matched the old Whitmore Capital authorization style from 11 years earlier, including the embossed corporate seal retired after his father's death. Evelyn watched him quietly from across the stainless steel counter. She did not rush him. People processed betrayal slowly when money and family carried the same name. "Where did you get this?" Damien finally asked, his voice lower now. Evelyn folded the towel neatly beside the sink before answering. "My father kept copies of everything." Damien looked up sharply. "Then why wait 11 years? Because proof means nothing when the wrong people control the story." The morning sunlight creeping through the kitchen windows painted pale gold across the marble floors outside, while hotel employees quietly prepared for breakfast service. Somewhere in the lobby, silverware clinked softly against porcelain plates. The normal sounds of wealth continuing as if nothing underneath it had cracked open overnight. Damien looked back down at the paper. This transfer was approved 2 days before the scandal became public. Evelyn nodded once. "Exactly. But according to the investigation, your father accessed the account alone after hours." "Yes." Her expression remained calm. That was the official version. Damien suddenly remembered something. A vague memory from childhood. His father yelling behind closed office doors late at night, while attorneys moved in and out of the penthouse study. He had been 26 then. Ruthless. Brilliant. Untouchable. The kind of man newspapers admired and employees feared. Damien had spent years trying not to become him completely. Maybe he had failed more than he realized. "Who else knew about this document?" he asked quietly. Evelyn's fingers brushed lightly against the silver watch beneath her sleeve again. "Only my father and me. Not investigators." She gave a faint shake of her head. The morning after he tried presenting evidence, the records disappeared from the company's servers. Damien's jaw tightened. "Deleted internally." "Yes." The answer came gently. Almost too gently for something so devastating. Damien leaned both hands against the counter, staring down at the faded signature again, while a heavy silence settled between them. He suddenly understood why she moved through the hotel like someone hiding from light. 11 years carrying the truth alone would teach anyone how to become invisible. "Why show me now?" he asked at last. Evelyn looked toward the ballroom entrance where early guests had begun arriving for a private breakfast meeting upstairs. Powerful people in tailored coats and polished shoes. Men who still trusted the Whitmore name. Because whoever reopened the Zurich account knows this document exists. Damien slowly lifted his eyes toward her. "How can you be sure?" 3 weeks ago someone broke into my apartment." His expression hardened immediately. "Did they take anything?" "No." "Then what did they want?" Evelyn became very still again. "To scare me." The softness in her voice unsettled him more than panic would have. Damien suddenly noticed the exhaustion beneath her calm posture. The careful way she watched exits. The instinctive pauses before answering questions. She had been living with fear for a long time. "Why not go to the police?" he asked. Evelyn looked at him with something close to sadness. "Your family owns half the city, Mr. Whitmore." He did not answer because part of him knew she was right. Wealth changed the direction of truth long before facts ever reached a courtroom. A hotel manager suddenly entered the kitchen carrying a tablet. "Mr. Whitmore, your uncle is here." Damien straightened immediately. "Uncle Victor?" "Yes, sir. He says he came as soon as he heard about the missing funds." Evelyn's eyes changed the instant she heard the name. Small change. Almost invisible. But Damien saw it clearly now. The silence. The tension. The recognition. "You know him," Damien said quietly after the manager left. Evelyn lowered her gaze for the first time since sunrise. "Yes." "How?" Her voice became almost a whisper. "Because Victor Whitmore was the last person who visited my father before everything disappeared." Victor Whitmore entered the executive dining room at exactly 7:10 in the morning carrying an umbrella and the kind of calm confidence only old money could buy. The rain had finally stopped outside, leaving Manhattan wrapped in pale silver fog beneath the rising sun. Damien stood near the windows watching his uncle remove his dark wool coat, while hotel staff quietly poured fresh coffee nearby. At 63, Victor Whitmore still carried himself like a man accustomed to control. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect timing. His silver hair remained neatly combed despite the storm outside, and the gold cufflinks beneath his tailored coat reflected softly beneath the dining room lights. "Damien." he said warmly, opening his arms slightly. I came as soon as I heard. Damien shook his hand without smiling. That was fast. Victor gave a small shrug. When $80 million disappears from the family trust, people move quickly. His tone sounded smooth, concerned. But Damien noticed something strange immediately. Victor never asked whether the missing funds had been recovered, only whether they disappeared. Evelyn stood silently near the far side of the room, refilling water glasses while pretending not to listen. But every muscle in her body had tightened the moment Victor entered. Damien could see it now, the subtle caution in her movements, the instinctive distance she kept between herself and his uncle. Victor accepted a cup of coffee from another server and finally noticed Evelyn standing near the window. His expression changed for less than a second. Tiny, almost invisible, but enough. Recognition. Then it vanished beneath another polished smile. New staff? Victor asked casually. Damien watched him carefully. Her name is Evelyn Carter. Silence. Soft. Dangerous. Victor's fingers paused briefly around the coffee cup before continuing normally. Carter, he repeated politely. Any relation to Richard Carter? Evelyn lowered her eyes immediately. He was my father, sir. Victor smiled sadly and shook his head once. Terrible what happened to him. Damien studied both of them in silence. Nobody else in the room noticed the tension beneath the conversation, but he did now. Every pause, every careful word, every glance avoided too quickly. Victor sat down slowly near the long conference table while attorneys upstairs continued searching for the missing money. Your father was brilliant. Victor continued softly toward Evelyn. A shame he became involved in such unfortunate circumstances. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the silver tray in her hands. He did not become involved voluntarily. The room became still again. Victor looked up at her fully now for the first time. Calm eyes. Measuring eyes. That is an interesting statement. It is a true one. Damien almost never saw anyone speak to Victor Whitmore that way. Most executives feared him. Investors respected him. Employees avoided disappointing him at all costs. Yet Evelyn's voice remained perfectly steady. Victor gave a quiet laugh beneath his breath. You sound very certain for someone carrying coffee. Truth does not care about uniforms. The sentence landed heavily between them. Damien noticed the smallest flicker of irritation behind his uncle's smile before it disappeared again. Victor leaned back slowly in his chair. You remind me of your father. Evelyn said nothing. Outside the windows, the city finally began waking fully beneath the fading storm clouds. Yellow taxis crawled through wet streets while sunlight reflected softly against the skyscrapers across Park Avenue. Inside the dining room, the air felt colder. Damien stepped closer toward the table. Uncle Victor, he said carefully, did you reopen the Zurich Reserve account last month? The question sliced cleanly through the room. Victor's eyes lifted slowly toward him. Calm. Controlled. Of course not. Then who did? Victor stirred his coffee once before answering. Damien, right now your priority should be protecting this family, not chasing ghosts from 11 years ago. Evelyn lowered the tray carefully onto the service cart beside her. The faint sound of silverware touching porcelain echoed softly through the silence. Sometimes, she said quietly, ghosts are only people the powerful failed to bury properly. Victor Whitmore looked directly at her then, and for the first time since entering the room, his smile disappeared completely. Victor Whitmore left the dining room 20 minutes later with the same polished calm he had entered with, but the silence he left behind felt heavier than before. Damien stood near the windows watching his uncle's black sedan disappear into the slow morning traffic below, while Evelyn quietly gathered untouched coffee cups from the conference table. Neither of them spoke immediately. The city outside looked cleaner after the storm, but inside the Whitmore Grand, old secrets were beginning to surface faster than anyone could contain them. Finally, Damien turned away from the glass. You think he did it? Evelyn placed another cup carefully onto the silver tray before answering. I think your uncle has spent 11 years making sure the wrong people carried the blame. Damien rubbed a tired hand across his jaw. He wanted to reject the idea completely. Victor Whitmore had practically raised him after his father died. Calm, reliable, strategic, the steady hand behind the family empire. But this morning Damien could not stop replaying the expression on Victor's face when Evelyn mentioned Richard Carter. Not guilt exactly. Recognition. Why would he reopen the account now? Damien asked quietly. Evelyn's blue eyes lifted toward him. Because someone is running out of time. A soft buzz interrupted them. Damien's phone vibrated against the conference table. He glanced down at the screen and immediately frowned. It was his lead investigator upstairs. What is it? Damien answered sharply. The voice on the other end sounded tense. Sir, we found another transfer linked to the Zurich Reserve. Damien straightened instantly. How much? $9 million. Evelyn stopped moving entirely. When? Damien asked. Papers shuffled faintly through the phone speaker. Transferred at 6:42 this morning. Damien's expression darkened immediately. That is impossible. We locked every connected account overnight. A pause followed. Then the investigator spoke more quietly. The authorization came from inside the hotel. Silence. Heavy and immediate. Damien slowly lowered the phone from his ear while his thoughts raced. Someone inside the Whitmore Grand had just moved another $9 million during the middle of the investigation itself, which meant the person responsible was close. Very close. Evelyn's voice came softly across the room. They are panicking now. Damien looked at her sharply. How do you know? Because careful people do not move money twice in one night unless they are afraid. Her calm unsettled him again. She spoke about financial crimes the way doctors spoke about symptoms. Quiet certainty. Experience. Damien ended the call slowly. The transfer originated inside the hotel network. Evelyn's eyes lowered briefly. Thinking. Calculating. Then they are not trying to escape anymore, she whispered. They are trying to erase something before you find it. Damien suddenly remembered the old authorization document still folded inside his jacket pocket. His father's signature. The Zurich account. Richard Carter. Victor's reaction this morning. Pieces that should not connect somehow beginning to fit together perfectly. There is something else you are not telling me, he said carefully. Evelyn became still again. Yes. What? She hesitated for the first time in hours. Not because she lacked confidence. Because the truth hurt. Damien recognized the difference now. Slowly, she reached into her apron pocket and removed a small brass key attached to a faded leather tag. The engraving on the tag had almost disappeared with age, but Damien could still read it clearly. Zurich Archive B. His pulse slowed instantly. What is that? Evelyn looked down at the key resting in her palm. My father gave it to me the week before the investigation destroyed him. Damien stared at the worn brass key, while morning sunlight spilled softly across the dining room floor between them. What does it open? Evelyn finally lifted her eyes toward him again. There was no fear left in them now. Only exhaustion. And truth. A safety deposit box, she whispered softly. One your family spent 11 years trying to find before I did. Damien Whitmore had spent most of his life believing secrets lived inside people. Inside conversations. Inside lies carefully rehearsed behind closed doors. But as he stared at the worn brass key resting in Evelyn Carter's hand, he realized some secrets survived because they were locked away physically, waiting for the right person to finally open them. The dining room around them had begun filling slowly with wealthy breakfast guests speaking in soft voices over fresh espresso and financial headlines. Nobody noticed the tension standing silently beside the conference table near the windows. Nobody noticed the billionaire heir staring at a waitress holding the key that could destroy his family's reputation forever. Why keep it hidden this long? Damien asked quietly. Evelyn closed her fingers gently around the key before slipping it back into her apron pocket. Because my father told me if anything happened to him, I should never trust anyone connected to Whitmore Capital. Damien lowered his eyes briefly. The sentence landed harder than he expected. And yet you trusted me enough to show me. Not yet. She spoke softly. I am deciding whether I should. Damien almost smiled at the honesty in that answer. Almost. Instead, he looked toward the elevators across the lobby where attorneys and investigators continued moving between floors carrying folders and laptops like soldiers preparing for a quiet war. Somewhere inside the hotel, another $9 million had vanished only hours ago. Time was shrinking. We need to open that box, he said firmly. Evelyn studied him for several seconds before answering. If we do, there is no going back. There already is not. Her eyes softened slightly at that. Not warmth exactly. Recognition. Like she was finally beginning to see the difference between Damien Whitmore and the empire that raised him. A hotel employee suddenly hurried toward them carrying a tablet. Mr. Whitmore, security needs you upstairs immediately. Damien frowned. Why? Someone accessed the internal archive server again. Evelyn's posture changed instantly. Tiny shift, but sharp. What time? She asked before the employee could answer. 7:58. Her face went pale beneath the kitchen lights. Damien noticed immediately. What is wrong? Evelyn looked toward him slowly. My father uploaded encrypted evidence to the archive server the same week he hid the Zurich records. Damien's chest tightened. You think someone is trying to erase it? No, her voice dropped almost to a whisper. I think someone finally found it. Upstairs, the executive archive room felt colder than the rest of the hotel. Computer screens glowed softly across rows of old financial servers, while Damien's security team worked frantically beside scattered printouts and open databases. The moment Damien entered, his lead investigator approached quickly. Sir, someone remotely activated an archived account hidden inside the original Carter investigation files. Damien glanced toward Evelyn standing silently behind him. What account? The investigator swallowed carefully. Richard Carter's private forensic backup. The room fell silent. What was inside it? Damien asked. The investigator hesitated before turning one of the monitors toward them. A single folder appeared on screen beneath a timestamp dated 11 years earlier. The file name contained only 2 words. Whitmore transfers. Evelyn stopped breathing for half a second. Damien noticed. Open it, he ordered immediately. The investigator clicked the file. Lines of financial transactions instantly flooded the monitor. Offshore accounts. Internal authorizations. Hidden reserve movements stretching back over 15 years. Every transfer tied directly to Whitmore Capital leadership. Damien stared at the screen while his pulse slowed into something dangerously calm. Richard Carter had not been hiding random evidence. He had been documenting an entire system. Oh my God, one attorney whispered quietly behind them. Then another file appeared automatically beneath the first one. Audio recording. Victor meeting. Dated 11 years earlier. The room became perfectly still. Evelyn lowered her eyes slowly, as if she already knew what waited inside the recording. Damien looked toward the investigator without blinking. Play it. The investigator pressed play, and for a moment all anyone could hear was the faint static hum of an old recording device waking back to life after 11 years buried inside forgotten servers. Then voices emerged through the speakers. Richard Carter first. Calm. Professional. Tired. The numbers do not match the reserve transfers, Victor. Someone moved the pension funds before the audit. Silence followed briefly on the recording before another voice answered. Smooth. Controlled. Victor Whitmore. Richard, you are looking at this too emotionally. Damien felt something cold move slowly through his chest as the room around him became perfectly still. Attorneys stopped breathing. Investigators froze beside glowing computer screens. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the floor while the voices from the past continued speaking through the speakers overhead. $32 million vanished, Richard said on the recording. And now another 12 moved through Zurich under false authorization. Papers shuffled faintly through the audio. Then Victor's voice again, calm enough to sound almost kind. You need to let this go. I cannot. Richard sounded exhausted now. People trusted us with retirement accounts. Families trusted us. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Victor spoke more quietly. And if this investigation destroys Whitmore Capital, what happens to all those families then? Damien stared at the monitor without blinking. He remembered his uncle using that same tone his entire life. Gentle. Reasonable. Dangerous because it sounded caring while controlling everything underneath it. Richard answered softly on the recording. Truth matters more than reputation. Victor laughed once beneath his breath. Not cruel. Worse. Disappointed. That is why you were never built for this business. The room grew colder somehow. Damien suddenly noticed his own reflection faintly mirrored in the black monitor screen beside the audio timeline. Same sharp jawline as his father. Same eyes as the Whitmore men before him. For the first time in years, he hated seeing his own last name. The recording continued. What are you saying? Richard asked quietly. Victor's answer came slowly. Carefully. I am saying there are people above both of us who will protect this company at any cost. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Damien noticed immediately. She had heard this before. Maybe not the recording itself, but the truth hidden inside it. You are asking me to falsify the report, Richard whispered. I am asking you to survive. Then silence. Long enough to feel human. Painful. Heavy. Finally Richard spoke again, softer now. If I refuse. Victor's answer came immediately. Then they will need someone to blame. The recording ended there. Abruptly. The room remained frozen in silence after the speakers clicked off. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Outside the archive windows, sunlight spilled fully across Manhattan now, bright and ordinary against a city built on invisible deals and hidden money. Damien slowly lowered himself into one of the conference chairs, as if his body no longer fully belonged to him. 11 years. His family had destroyed an innocent man to protect the empire carrying their name. Worse than that, part of his father likely knew. Maybe all of him knew. Evelyn finally looked toward Damien again. There was no satisfaction in her expression. No revenge. Only sadness too old to still feel loud. My father refused, she said quietly. Damien swallowed hard, but said nothing. She stepped closer to the glowing monitor where the old audio file remained paused on screen. 3 days later, every account was moved under his credentials. One of the attorneys whispered softly behind them. Dear God. Damien rubbed both hands slowly across his face while the truth settled around him piece by piece. Not rumor anymore. Not suspicion. Proof. Real enough to collapse everything. Victor knew, Damien murmured. Evelyn nodded once. Yes. And my father? A painful silence followed. Then Evelyn answered gently. I think your father chose the company over the truth. Damien closed his eyes briefly. Somewhere deep inside the hotel, silverware clinked softly against breakfast plates, while wealthy guests laughed over fresh coffee, completely unaware that the Whitmore empire was beginning to crack open from the inside. The executive archive room remained silent long after the recording ended. Nobody seemed willing to move first, as if even the smallest sound might make the truth more permanent. Damien Whitmore sat motionless at the conference table while morning sunlight spread slowly across the rows of servers surrounding them. The glow reflected against old financial records, forgotten investigations, and hidden transactions that had survived longer than anyone expected. Across from him, Evelyn Carter quietly removed her hotel apron and folded it carefully over the back of a chair. The simple motion felt strangely significant, like someone finally setting down a disguise they had carried too long. Damien watched her without speaking. She looked different now somehow, not because the uniform was gone, but because the silence between them had changed. There were no more guesses left, no more carefully hidden fragments. Only truth. One of the attorneys finally cleared his throat softly. Mr. Whitmore, if these files become public, he stopped himself before finishing the sentence. They all understood already. Lawsuits, investigations, federal audits, the collapse of trust. An empire built over generations beginning to crack beneath the weight of its own secrets. Damien slowly leaned back in his chair and stared toward the city skyline beyond the windows. His father's name stood on hospitals, museums, university buildings. Half of Manhattan carried the Whitmore legacy carved into stone and steel. But now all he could hear was Richard Carter's voice from the recording. Truth matters more than reputation. Evelyn stepped quietly toward the monitor and closed the old audio file. My father spent 3 years trying to force someone to listen, she said softly. After a while, he stopped believing anyone would. Damien lowered his eyes. I should have known. You were young. That is not an excuse. The answer came sharper than he intended. Several investigators exchanged uncomfortable glances before quietly leaving the room one by one. Soon only Damien and Evelyn remained beside the glowing monitors and scattered documents. The silence felt less hostile now, heavy but honest. Damien rubbed a tired hand across his face before finally speaking again. Why did you stay? Evelyn looked toward him carefully. What do you mean? After everything my family did to yours. He paused briefly. Why spend 11 months working inside this hotel instead of exposing us immediately? Evelyn became very still beside the window. The sunlight caught faint silver reflections across the old watch beneath her sleeve. Because anger is loud, she answered quietly. But truth survives longer when it learns patience. Damien stared at her. She did not sound bitter. That was what unsettled him most. Anyone else would have wanted revenge. Public humiliation. Destruction. But Evelyn carried herself like someone who had spent years protecting truth instead of weaponizing it. You could destroy us with this, he said softly. Evelyn shook her head once. No, her eyes lifted toward him steadily. Your family already did that to itself. The words landed gently, almost kindly, which somehow hurt more. Damien stood slowly from the table and walked toward the windows overlooking Manhattan. Far below, the city moved normally through its busy morning. People crossing intersections, yellow taxis sliding through traffic, coffee carts opening beneath office towers. Nobody knew that one of the wealthiest families in America stood on the edge of collapse. The 9 million transferred this morning, Damien said quietly. Victor moved it, did he not? Evelyn walked closer beside him. Yes. How can you be sure? She reached into her pocket and placed a folded printout onto the table behind them. Damien turned toward it slowly. It was another transfer authorization from the archive server. Fresh timestamp. Fresh account movement. And beneath the approval line sat Victor Whitmore's encrypted executive signature. Damien closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, something inside him had changed. The hesitation was gone now. I am ending this today, he said quietly. Evelyn studied him carefully. That choice will cost you everything. Damien looked toward the sunlight stretching across the city his family once controlled so easily, then back toward the evidence spread across the room. Maybe, he answered softly. But innocent people should not keep paying for what powerful men were too afraid to admit. 3 months later, the rain returned to Manhattan on a quiet Thursday evening. Soft water rolled down the windows of a small cafe tucked between 2 old brick buildings on the Upper West Side, while jazz music drifted gently through the warm yellow light inside. Evelyn Carter stood behind the counter pouring coffee into ceramic cups with the same calm movements she had carried inside the Whitmore Grand. Some things about her had not changed at all. She still wore the silver watch beneath her sleeve, still moved quietly through crowded rooms, still spoke softly enough that people leaned closer when she answered. But now nobody looked at her like she was invisible. A newspaper rested folded near the register beside the pastries. The front page carried a familiar headline. Whitmore Capital announces historic restitution fund. Below it sat a photograph of Damien Whitmore standing outside a federal courthouse without security guards or publicists beside him. No polished smile. No expensive performance. Just honesty. The investigation had lasted 11 exhausting weeks. Victor Whitmore resigned before the hearings began. Several hidden offshore accounts were uncovered alongside years of manipulated reserve transfers tied directly to senior executives inside the company. The stolen pension funds were recovered gradually through international settlements and asset freezes. Families who had spent years believing their savings were gone began receiving letters confirming repayment. Quietly, without media spectacle, Damien insisted on that part personally. He also dissolved several divisions of Whitmore Capital built during the years connected to the fraud scheme. Investors called him reckless. Board members called him emotional. Financial networks predicted the collapse of the Whitmore empire almost daily for weeks. But something unexpected happened instead. People trusted him more after he finally stopped protecting the lie. The small bell above the cafe door rang softly. Evelyn looked up from the espresso machine. Damien Whitmore stepped inside, carrying Rain across the shoulders of a dark charcoal coat. The city had changed him a little these past months. Or maybe truth had. He looked less untouchable now, less polished, more human. His eyes found Evelyn immediately across the warm cafe light. Neither of them spoke at first. They did not need to anymore. Damien walked slowly toward the counter while the soft jazz piano continued in the background. Coffee? Evelyn asked gently. A faint smile touched his face. Only if you think I earned it this time. She almost laughed at that. Almost. Instead, she reached for a clean ceramic cup and poured fresh coffee carefully while Rain tapped softly against the windows beside them. Damien noticed the silver watch beneath her sleeve again. You still wear it. Evelyn glanced down briefly. It reminds me who told the truth first. Damien lowered his eyes for a moment. Your father deserved better. Yes, she answered softly. He did. Silence settled comfortably between them this time. Not painful anymore. Peaceful. Damien reached into his coat pocket and placed a thin envelope onto the counter beside the coffee cup. Evelyn frowned slightly. What is this? A scholarship foundation. He looked toward her carefully. For students studying forensic accounting and financial ethics. Evelyn stared at the envelope without touching it. Across the top, she could already see the printed title, The Richard Carter Foundation. Her eyes softened immediately. Not with tears, with something quieter. Relief. The kind that arrives after carrying grief for too long alone. Damien wrapped both hands around the warm coffee cup and looked out toward the rain-covered streets of Manhattan. You know, he said softly, my whole life I thought power meant protecting the family name. Evelyn leaned lightly against the counter beside him. And now, he looked toward her again. Calm, honest, finally free of performance. Now I think power means telling the truth before someone innocent pays for the lie. Outside, the rain continued falling gently across the city while inside the small cafe, two people sat quietly beside warm coffee and the soft sound of jazz music, knowing some truths arrive loudly, but the ones that change lives forever usually arrive in silence. And if this story reminded you that dignity does not need to shout to be powerful, take a moment to share your thoughts below, because sometimes the quietest people leave the deepest mark of all.